Lake Erie is the canary in the coal mine for the Great Lakes.
The whole lake is green. Everywhere you look, as far as the eye can see, the water's green.
I stopped coming out here because it seemed like every time I was out here, I would get respiratory problems. You sit on your boat for 20 minutes and your eyes will start to burn. And the smell, I can't even describe the smell.
The city started sucking it into their water intake, and the bad water was already at the plant.
The ratepayers of Northwest Ohio have had to reach into their pocket for the $500 million needed to turn this into world-class drinking water.
When they say they don't know the answer, they know.
But we do not know what happens in the long term to your body, to your liver, to your kidneys.
Well, let's not even talk about the land. What's your responsibility to your neighbor? Everybody's our neighbor.
There is no mystery anymore as to who is causing this problem.
Till I see somebody do something, I'm on the bandwagon to get it fixed.
This lake is never going to recover.
Good evening. On behalf of the St. Rose Peace and Justice Committee, we welcome you here tonight, along with all of our sponsors. Before we get started, we're going to have Father Kyle Gase from St. Rose Parish lead us in a blessing or prayer.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege for me to be here with all of you. So let's bow our heads and place ourselves in God's holy presence. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of your creation, in particular the beauty that surrounds us here in Toledo and Northwest Ohio with Lake Erie and the Maumee River. You call us to be good stewards of your creation that you've given us, and we ask you to open our minds and our hearts to love your creation and to always care for it. Bless our time together this evening and bless our efforts. And we make this prayer through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
This evening, now I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce to you our moderator. And most of you are familiar with him. He probably needs no introduction because we've seen him on the, I think it was the WTOL, Channel 11. He was the news anchorman there for many years. And he's also was the host for the Leading Edge for Channel 11 as well. And for those of us who follow the Falcons, BG, basketball teams, men and women, then you've also seen and heard him do the announcing for those games. So please welcome Jerry Anderson.
All right, we're going to get the panel up here. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. Did you enjoy the movie? Enjoy's a relative. What do you mean by that, Jerry? Did you find it interesting? Show of hands. Did you find it informative? Did it answer some questions? Did it raise some questions? Anybody get ticked off? Yeah. 9 years ago, I'm guessing most of you know where you were on this weekend 9 years ago. I got the emergency phone call getting me out of bed in the morning because I had done the late local news the night before. Jerry, they can't drink the water in Toledo. You got to get up here. And then we just went on and did marathon coverage. And I suggested to my bosses at the time, we ought to be the station that stays on this issue no matter what happens. But I know we won't because I know the way the media works. Oh, there's a new shiny object over here. And then we chase over there. I told them, This is going to be a tough one. And ladies and gentlemen, I thought about that this week. 9 years later, when I read that, oh, by the way, no swimming in Maumee Bay, at Maumee Bay State Park, because of the crap in the water. Tonight, a whole bunch of really nice people are out there having barefoot at the beach. It's a great fundraiser for a great cause. Boys and Girls Clubs, they're standing next to 9 years later. And I'm just wondering, how? Why? And that's what we're going to try to get to tonight with your help. I have some questions, but the easiest gig in the world, they said, hey, Jerry, we're going to let the audience ask questions. Let me introduce, if I can, please, our panel here tonight. Far end, you heard him in there. By the way, I heard there was a smattering of applause when you said the Ohio legislature is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ohio Farm Bureau. This is Wade Kapsakavich, the mayor of the city of Toledo. The former now retired director of the Ohio Sea Grant Stone Lab, Dr. Jeff Reuter. You saw him in the piece as well. The coordinator of Lake Erie Advocates, longtime activist on behalf of Lake Erie, and yes, a Point Place guy, Mike Ferner, right over here, ladies and gentlemen. The president of the Ohio Farmers Union, Joe Logan, is here. Joe, thank you for being here. Made his way up from Ottawa to be with us tonight. Actually, his farm is the other side of the state, over by the Pennsylvania state line. It's good to have you here in Maumee, Ohio. So let's get started with a couple of things. One is, I think, a very interesting and important point of clarification, because I've been among those on my show talking about CAFOs. CAFOs. We heard about them, concentrated animal feeding operations. They do have some regulations, do they not, Dr. Reuter? Okay. If there's another microphone in the house, that would be nice. Here we go, Jeff.
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, as the movie indicated, and I really love this movie. It does a great job on covering a number of these issues. But as it indicated, the large CAFOs, and when we say CAFO, Department of Agriculture, a number of the agricultural groups will only use that term for the regulated group, and that would be above 2,500 hogs, above 700
I wanted to make sure
cows.
we got real clear on that. You saw those numbers up there. You get above, 2,500 on hogs, 700 on cattle, right? Then you do have some regulations. Dr. Reuter will say we need more, but they have some. But in that differentiation is a very, very key point. I'm going to go to 699 cows, and my regulation is what now?
No regulation. And what's interesting, in a recent study that we did, you look at the Auglaize watershed, now 90% of the animal operations are in the unregulated group. The vast majority of the manure is not coming from the CAFOs, but from the unregulated ones. That's where the major growth has been. That's the most recent data. And even when you look at the CAFOs, they are allowed to apply more than 3 times the amount of phosphorus that's needed for maximum crop production. If they're applying that amount, and they're applying more than that, the vast majority, if they're applying that amount, the runoff from those fields will be 60% to 200% above our targets.
Joe Logan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We have, I guess, sparred with the Department of Agriculture about this loophole that Jeff described, of allowing dairy farms to apply many times the advisable limit. And their only response to us has been that if we don't allow this exception to the rule of what we know is best for the environment, then their manure lagoons may run over and create a toxic event locally. And so we need to open the door to allow this to happen. Now, we've been wrestling with this idea for decades at the Ohio Farmers Union and the National Farmers Union. Of course, our fundamental premise is that we believe that farms should be smaller and more distributed throughout the state, and therefore livestock would be smaller groups distributed much more broadly throughout the state.
Can somebody give me an idea? when we take a look at these, whether they're the CAFOs, whether they're the one-unders, that's what they call the ones that slip in under the regulations, okay? How many of them are there in our watershed, and is that number static? Is it declining? Is it increasing?
There's at least 800 of them in the western Lake Erie watershed, and over 50 more of these have been given permits just since the 2014 water crisis, and that's just Ohio. That's from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. But I'd like to add to the previous discussion about the one-unders, and this is, whether you're talking about the one-unders or the Bridgewater Dairy in Williams County with 4,000 cows, this is a failed model of agriculture. How many people here were, say, at least 10 years old in the mid-1990s? Probably almost everybody here. Did you ever once, before 1995, go to the grocery store and wait in line for milk or eggs or hamburger? No, we didn't. That was prior to these inhumane animal factories coming into our watershed. We did not rely on them. So to say that we have to have them now is just making an excuse for the kind of agriculture Joe's talking about that has driven thousands and thousands of farmers off the land. And we didn't have this pollution problem before these CAFOs came in. Lake Erie was getting better and better.
The CAFOs, the animal feeding operations, they are licensed. The state of Ohio has to approve them, yes?
Doesn't, Jerry?
I don't know, I'm asking, you're the panelist.
They can approve them, they can take their rubber stamp and say, yep, you're approved. And really, it's like having a speed limit law with no traffic cops. There is nobody out there enforcing it. They can say, oh, you have to put your manure here or here or here. Who's out there to make sure that happens? Some of the people that live in that area that are out taking pictures, oh, they're flooding this area with manure again. You know, this is a model of agriculture that just is not sustainable at the Great Black Swamp where we are, where we've got drainage tile everywhere. They put liquid manure on it and think that we're going to somehow solve the problem.
Mayor.
The state of Ohio does have to permit or give permission to the building of a new CAFO, but it doesn't have to. There's no rule that you have to have more CAFOs. I think we have plenty. And yet the state continues to approve them. There are new ones that are coming online all the time. I think 3 in the last year, for instance. As Mike said, 50 since the water crisis. Yeah, so you do have to get permission to build these things. I don't think the state of Ohio should be giving permission. We have enough. We have too many.
But this is an agency of the state government that is doing this, right? This is not elected officials.
That is correct. These
are
bureaucrats who report to elected officials.
There we go.
But the elected officials, in this case, fundamentally, oh God, it's hard to say they don't care, but it's pretty close they don't care. They care about some things. They care about not angering their voters. Unfortunately for all of us, their voters don't tend to be urban dwellers. They tend to be farmers. And so they are just loath to do the one thing, relatively easy thing, needed to do to address this problem, and that is to impose any kind of a regulation. I had someone in my office, and I don't want to, I'm already hot under the collar, so I don't want to out this person.
Oh, go ahead.
But let's say is very high up in state government and explaining about H2 Ohio and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, it's just, why don't you just flush the money down the toilet? It's just, I mean, that's not, and I made some suggestions, and this person, my door to my office was open, and the body language is important here, Jerry. She goes like this. You're talking about regulation. And I said, yes, I am. But the culture in Columbia, that's what we're dealing with. The one thing, literally the only thing that's going to make a difference here is almost like a profanity. So you can throw up, whatever, 200 million, 200 trillion, I don't care, it doesn't matter. Until some kind of grown-up regulation is applied to the folks causing the problem.
Okay, I want to go there. I want to go there. Dr. Reuter was on my television show, Leading Edge, because I wanted to get this out. You have said, sir, that you do not believe that voluntary compliance will ever solve the problem we're facing in Lake Erie. Do you still believe that?
100% true.
Therefore, there must be regulations.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the farm community that says?
I have followed Jeff's career for decades now, and we've worked together in a number of forums, and I absolutely agree that we cannot get to the finish line without actually having regulation that determines the number of farms that can be in an individual watershed, the number of pounds of nutrients you can apply to a given acre, and we simply need to do that if we want to get to the finish line.
Well, just real quick, never. Can we get to the starting line? I'm worried we're not at the starting line. And here, there are folks much more learned than I up here. The water crisis was 9 years ago. Mm-hmm. True or false? There is more toxic junk in the water today than there was in August.
Is that a correct statement?
Is that true?
To the best of your knowledge, Dr. Reuter, I know you're retired now, but help me out.
It certainly hasn't gone down 40%.
There's 50 more of these CAFOs now than there were. There are 3.5 million more animals than there were in 2014. There are 25 million animals in this watershed, and this movie is great in a number of ways, but did you ever once see one of these factory farms? No. When you saw farms, you saw the organic farmer, you saw animals out in the pastures. They won't let you in these places. The filmmakers were not able to get in. And I want to go back to H2 Ohio for just a minute, because that got a lot of play here. Our group has done months and months of research looking through studies that have been done all over this part of the country on things like no-till, cover crops, on and on and on, these H2 Ohio measures. And what we found out is that they are very hit and miss, and in fact, some of them make the problem worse. Cover crops, there is a mountain of research that says cover crops result in more dissolved phosphorus getting into the waterways than if you don't have cover crops. And so to say that the H2 Ohio is going to, whether it's voluntary or mandatory, these things don't work because they don't stop the dissolved phosphorus. And I'm telling you, we don't need this form of agriculture.
Last November, here come your questions. Last November, the U.S. EPA notified the ODA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, that their CAFO program did not comply with 81, I believe is this number, federal rules and regulations. That being the case, why can't we shut down their permitting program? Anybody want to weigh in on that fun one? It's a good question.
Because the Ohio legislature is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ohio Farm Bureau.
The mayor's already copyrighted that line, but okay.
You got it. I think I stole it from Mike, actually. Okay. But it's true, there's not the political will.
Why aren't CAFOs required to have waste treatment plants like those used for human waste in our cities? I appreciate that, Dr. Fournier. Here we go.
If they had them, guess who would be paying for them? The taxpayers. They'll say, we can't afford to stay in business. Well, I'm sorry, you're trying to force a model of agriculture on the land that is unsustainable, and you want us to pick up the tab.
Joe, will these things we heard in the movie, it's just going to take us out of business? Is it?
Oh, absolutely not. It might put some strain on some of those very large livestock operations if they found out that suddenly we have an infrastructure for 4,000 cows and now we're only allowed to have 700 cows. That would be a strain on that individual, but it would not do anything to the dairy industry or to the beef industry or to the poultry industry, to the hog industry. You could simply just multiply the number of farm operators with smaller footprints.
Wally asks, please give an example or an explanation, given an explanation as to whether the bloom is due to CAFOs or due to other farm practices or others. And this says something about like City of Maumee. We're in Maumee and we're glad to be. Thank you, Maumee, for hosting us.
The city of Maumee.
But we found out that for what, a quarter of a century, the city of Maumee was pumping untreated raw sewage out into the river, heading out to the lake. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'm not going to steal one of your lines because that was the best one, but in your presentation up there, while you put it all on, or 90% of it on agriculture and especially the large animal operations, you said we're not any part of it. Does the city of Toledo know, even after its $1 billion over 20 years investment, do we not still pump out raw sewage in high rain situations, storm situations that overrun our sewage treatment plant? Don't we do that?
We do.
The farm folks will remind me about that all the time.
I get it. We do, and other big cities along Lake Erie do, Cleveland, but we shouldn't pretend that we don't know how much that contributes to the problem. It's about 6%. We're sorry for the 6% of the problem we cause, and we're fined for it, and we're regulated till literally the cows come home. And we are in the process, we've already spent $1 billion improving 2 of our water plants. We're on the verge of doing that again for a 3rd. This is an important thing. We, in my judgment, and the judgment of science, no longer have a drinking water problem in Toledo. We still have a lake water problem. We don't have a drinking water problem. Why? Because the ratepayers of this region have had to reach into their pockets for almost $1 billion to invest all these gadgets and gizmos. So now this terrible water, by the time it gets to your faucet, it actually drinks. It's a shame that we are taxed to this level simply because the 94% of the problem isn't being addressed. So yeah, we contribute to the problem, and you're taxed for it, and we're penalized for it, and that's how it should be.
Let me tell you
folks
about
who were doing 94% of it.
About the city of Maumee and what happened. Jerry mentioned had been going on for decades is wrong. The city should be fined. It's being fined, and the ratepayers are going to be stuck with a big bill. But let me just mention the amount of phosphorus generated by the people of Maumee is 1/19 the amount of phosphorus coming from the Bridgewater Dairy in Williams County with 3,900 cows. So that's what happens when you have this kind of agriculture, and they take it, put it on the fields in liquid form.
1/19.
1/19.
Come on, Maumee, work harder. You used to have a stat. See if I can still pull this out of it, because I'm going to have it. You used to have this. You came on my show. The amount of waste, and put it in human terms, from major cities. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Listen to this.
We've figured this out over the years, and it's changed because we've measured it more accurately. Okay. Vicki and Larry Askins are out here. They're from Wood County. They know these stats inside and out. What we found out is we took USDA numbers for the amount of phosphorus generated by dairy cows, hogs, chickens, pigs, the whole thing, and the amount of phosphorus generated by human beings. The 25 million animals in our watershed generate as much phosphorus as the human populations of Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, and Atlanta. And that manure, the feces, and the urine is spread with no treatment whatsoever on the fields, and we wonder why all this draining into Lake Erie, we have a problem, which we didn't have prior to 1995.
At the end of the film listed foreign ownership of CAFOs. Did you guys see that at the end? That was true. How many CAFOs are foreign owned? Do we know? Does Ohio ask when they permit these? Do we know?
I don't think we do know. I do know that the state of Ohio actively solicited dairies from the Netherlands to come over into Ohio.
We had a
and
lot
Michigan.
of those here in Northwest Ohio.
Yes,
yeah.
right. So for years that was happening. I think that that's a bit of a red herring, so to speak. I don't think that's the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is allowing too huge of operations concentrated operations to allow it on a small footprint of land and a small watershed.
Are Ohio legislators supporting a total maximum daily program on Lake Erie? TMDL, total maximum daily load. I can tell you this. The week after the Toledo water crisis, I was at the home, the lakefront home of Ms. Bin, Sandy Bin, who said, Jerry, if we're ever going to get to the bottom of this, we're going to need TMDL's total maximum daily load. That limits the amount of phosphorus that can, she pointed out what had come, they brought Chesapeake Bay back using that 9 years later. Do we have TMDLs in Lake Erie? Help me out, do we?
We have TMDLs in a number of the watersheds. We don't have any for Maumee, and a judge through Environmental Law and Policy Center has just required Ohio to develop a TMDL. Ohio has submitted a draft plan for a TMDL for the Maumee River, and I can guarantee you right now this plan will fail. And we're asking, and one of the, you received a card coming in today to write to US EPA to encourage them to reject the Ohio plan, because the Ohio plan, I chaired the group of scientists that came up with our 40% reduction target. We had the first one in 2013, reiterated in 2014, again in 2017, 2015, US and Canada agreed to the target in 2016. As the mayor indicated, we've seen zero improvement. We haven't reduced the amount of phosphorus going in at all, not even 1%, zero improvement. The current plan does nothing to prevent the over-application of phosphorus on land. It does nothing to identify the fields that are causing the greatest problem. It has a margin of error listed as 3%, which is about an order of magnitude too small, and several other problems with the plan. There's no way this plan will succeed.
I'm just real quick. It would be wrong to say the state of Ohio has done nothing since 2014 to attack this problem. They've wasted $1 billion. They have. Yeah. They have, since the water crisis of 2014, the state of Ohio has thrown it's about $1.2 billion at this problem. And how much has it gone down? Zero. Because they won't do the one and only thing that can make a difference.
I think you told me early on with H2O, you said, Jerry, that's throwing money down rabbit holes.
It is. And Jeff Reuter mentioned that the TMDL's total maximum daily loads, right, which our group was very active in pushing for a number of years. Jeff is saying that the TMDLs in Ohio EPA's plan are not going to work. And I'll tell you why our organization pulled out of that lawsuit, that Howard Lerner group.
Yeah, you did. Why was that?
We pulled out because we started reading those TMDLs, and we found out there is nothing in them besides the H2 Ohio methods that are supposed to magically fix Lake Erie when they've been doing them for 2 decades and the lake hasn't gotten any better. That's what are in the TMDLs. So I swear, I don't know how you can write a TMDL and have these, cover crops, grassed waterways, buffer strips, all these management practices out in the field which have proven not to work. And now because you put them in a TMDL that's supposed to fix the lake. The fundamental problem is this watershed cannot sustain that type of agriculture.
The Ohio EPA has, thank you, Jill, for this question. The Ohio EPA has an agreement with the city of Maumee allowing them to dump 25 million gallons of sewage into the river annually. Maumee was fined by the Ohio EPA, we remember that, in 2021 for failing to self-report an average of 150 million gallons. This has gone on for 20 years. 2 years later, where does Maumee stand on the repairs they agreed to work on? And Jill not only submitted the question, but she has sourced her information. The source of what I just read you, Farm Bureau, ofbf.org article, City of Maumee caught after 20 years of sewage dumping. Can anybody give us an update?
The city of Maumee's total amount of phosphorus, if there was no treatment at all on Maumee's sewage, and we're just looking at phosphorus, the amount of phosphorus for the number of people that live in Maumee is 1/19th the amount of phosphorus from 3,900 cows in one dairy in Williams County. And we've got 25 million animals putting out phosphorus every day.
Joe, you're with the Farmers Union. There's the Ohio Farm Bureau. How you all get along?
Well, we do our best. We've had some back and forth with the Farm Bureau, and we find out that we're on opposite sides of many issues. We both want agriculture to be successful. Right. They believe agriculture will be successful if we support the infrastructure, and that includes very large agricultural operations. And we frankly believe that we need to have a whole different format for agriculture. So, yeah, we come at the problem from two different directions.
Let me toss this one at you, and I'm getting back. Your questions, by the way, are really good. You've saved me a lot of work. Thank you so very much. There was one that the Blade reported recently that something like 98% of farms are family farms.
Sure.
Is that true?
You can argue it either way. Our little farm back in northeastern Ohio
is a family farm.
Is a family farm, but it's incorporated like most farms are. So, so it's not the business arrangement that's the question. It's the size of the operation and how it's managed.
There's a stat for Northwest Ohio that says 55% of the farms are 50 acres or less, but those farms represent only 3% of the acres. The other 97% of the acres are controlled by really 45% of the farmers. Those kinds of stats are really important as we move forward when you think about regulations, because there are opportunities to create regulations only are in larger operations. So let's say you're going to do it, you could be very strict regulations on farms over 50 acres, and you're eliminating 55% of the farmers, typically the small family farms, from that kind of a requirement.
Well, Jeff, do this one for me too. The family, the traditional family, and they've grown their farm to 1,000 acres. And tell you what, we're going to put 250 acres in Dad's name and 250 in Mom's name, and then Junior gets 250 and Sissy gets 250, and we'll call it a family farm. It's still 1,000-acre.
Yeah, and Jerry, you've hit a key. We see that happen a lot on the CAFOs. Remember the regulated size? So let's say you have 2,800 cows. That's going to be a CAFO. It's going to be regulated. But let's divide that up into 4 farms, one that's owned by Mom, one by Dad, one by the 2 kids. And pretty soon you can have 4 farms, each 699 cows, and none of them regulated. And you still got 2,800 cows.
You got the feces of 2,800 animals.
And there's nothing magical about regulation because there's no enforcement. You can say you can't put liquid manure on a field if it's supposed to rain within 24 hours. That's in the law. You can't put liquid manure on frozen fields. That's in the law. You can't put it on over a certain number of times in the same place. But who's out there watching? You know, a handful of rural residents who are out taking pictures and trying to make complaints to the state agencies that are run by the same system that has created the problem.
US EPA is evaluating Ohio's bad plan to reduce algae. There is a petition to ask US EPA to take over, there's a petition to ask EPA to take over on Lake Erie, and it refers to waterkeeper Sandy Bin. Where are we on that? Who's in charge? Who has the final say? Ohio EPA, US EPA, is the US, I mean, weren't they kind of both brought kicking and screaming to the table in the first place?
Ohio EPA submitted their TMDL plan to US EPA.
Right.
That plan's being evaluated. A lot of us have looked at the plan and we just don't feel that that plan is not going to get us a 40% reduction. It just is not. There's no way. We're encouraging, US EPA has a choice. They can reject the plan and tell Ohio EPA to develop a new one.
Okay.
I think that's likely what they will do. Or they can themselves take over the operation and take it from Ohio EPA. In many ways...
This person seems to be thinking that's what they should be doing. You think that you would agree with that approach? Joe,
honestly, I think it would be better. I think it's going to be hard politically for Ohio EPA to do what needs to be done.
I've been to dozens of meetings with farmers about water quality issues over the last several years, and I can tell you that uniformly, farmers have an absolute aversion to the idea of regulatory oversight, and that would be amplified many times if US EPA were to come in and try to supplant the Ohio Department of Agriculture or Ohio EPA. But my belief is that there should not be any aversion to regulatory approach to the situation if everybody was doing the sort of best management practices and being judicious as they say that they are. So there's something that doesn't align.
A lot of industries are regulated in a lot of ways and nobody asks them permission, correct? So what is it we don't want regulation? Well, we don't want the crap in the water. So we have a stalemate here.
We didn't have nearly as much crap in the water before we started putting 5,000 cows on a single operation and generating millions of gallons of liquid waste and putting that on the fields where it goes right down into the drain tiles and right out into the streams. It's, again, we got this form of agriculture because politicians decided that a number of people could make a whole lot of money. They put the land grant colleges like OSU to work researching how to go into this new form of livestock agriculture. The subsidies are there by the billions of dollars, or this industry wouldn't exist. So it's a political animal. That's how it got here. It didn't get here because farmers who had been raising cows and pigs and chickens for generations all of a sudden decided we're going to put 25 million of them in our watershed.
Joe, thank you for soil. This goes to soil testing. Tell us what's available. How can we make recommendations for the entire year with an available test? Same problem applying manure. Where are we on monitoring? Are we out there monitoring anything?
You know, I was struck by in the movie how much monitoring goes into the lake.
Yes.
And I'm struck at how little monitoring goes on up in the watershed. Yep. And so we need to move, not that there's not fantastic work going on in the lake, but I think we really need to refocus our problem on what's happening up in the watershed, where those livestock and those watersheds meet.
I don't know if the four of us could say any more clearly what appears to be our consensus. And I know this is not optimistic, but it is not an exaggeration to say that nothing meaningful is happening to address this problem. Nothing. 9 years ago, we had a water crisis where the water system was shut down, 500,000 people were without water for 3 days, and it wasn't just the inconvenience. When there's no water, there are no surgeries. I mean, as a governor, everyone comes in, oh, well, but the water is the same. It hasn't improved a bit, not even a farthing if you are a Charles Dickens fan.
There you go.
Nothing. They've spent $1.2 billion. They've invested in all sorts of gadgets and gizmos to make sure that the crappy water tastes good when it comes out of the faucet. But They haven't done anything, not even one thing,
Stay with me.
to fix the problem.
We promised to hold this question and answer to 45 minutes. You guys are doing great in keeping things moving along. I want to move along towards some solution or some action steps. I don't want us all leaving here tonight saying, what are we going to do? I like this one, the honesty of somebody who wrote, aren't we all at fault? We can buy a cooked whole roasted chicken for $4 to $5. The CAFOs reduce the cost of the food we eat. So what is a real, underlined, workable solution? Oh, and there was some of that at the end of, with the organic. By the way, are we seeing more organic farmers? It was great to see them at the, okay. And they kind of said this is going to be consumer driven. We may have to pay the extra buck, but to have, okay. So what do we want? Does anybody here buy organic stuff at the store? That's a good share of you. Would more of you be inclined to buy organic food if you think it made a difference in what we're facing here? A lot of you. Okay, very good. It's a little more expensive. We got that. And we're living in this era of inflation and blah, blah. Okay, okay. Let's do this. Go ahead, Joe.
Here's another caveat to that solution. Over the course of the last decade anyway, through the intense lobbying of the Farm Bureau and other organizations, USDA has slipped a little bit on their enforcement of organic label, and they have essentially allowed some CAFOs to configure themselves in a way that qualifies as organic when they're really industrial farms. And so that's a keyhole that needs to be closed up.
You can have organic milk come from a factory farm. If those cows are fed organically raised feed, they're going to be labeled as being organic when you buy that. But that doesn't mean that milk is coming from cows that are out on the pasture that are pooping and peeing at a scale that the land can absorb.
Got you.
I understand that regulations sometimes makes things cost more. Our Cheerios would cost less if we were simply willing to tolerate a few insect carcasses and rodent hairs. I don't tolerate insect carcasses and rodent hairs, and yet neither does the government, because they impose regulations on the General Millses of the world that cause my Cheerios to cost more, but at least I'm not eating rodent hairs and insect carcasses. There is an easy solution to this, and I'll go back to the EPA director who was in my office. Regulation. That's it. Not voluntary suggestions. Voluntary suggestions has gotten us 9 years of nothing, and I'm sure a very sternly worded letter was sent, and maybe a little hand came out to slap the wrist of all the CAFOs that didn't meet those regulations. There's a status quo that's not working for us.
You see why I like to have the mayor on my show. He's always a good interview. You keep asking him enough, and he'll tell you, it was the EPA director. Okay, see, we got it. We got it. Are you aware of a $3 million project to put stone around Audubon Island to reduce erosion? 2 years and road across the river to the island. Please put this money to better use, like cleaning up the water quality of the river. Can anybody address Audubon Island? Does anybody want to go with the Cullen Park that we saw up there?
For all of the pessimism that I think maybe the movie has left us with and the panel has reinforced, that's a good news story. And I think there was some hope. This documentary was done in 2021, fundamentally, most of the reporting and the interviewing. In the 2 years since, that project, I don't want to say it's gone and dead, but it's not moving. It's not moving. And I think a lot of that is because of the activism of groups like this and the packed house you saw at the front. So the update is that there's no update. And that's a good thing. And I hope that gives hope because it can be a lonely battle when you're fighting
what can the average
impossible odds.
You put this in quotation marks. What can the average nobody special person do about this problem? Well, that's all it is, right? You are special. You're here. But let's talk about action steps, and I have a couple of things that I have been asked to remind you about. But Dr. Reuter, let's get over to you. What can anybody here do to make a difference?
Honestly, this is a good time to be writing to the governor, to writing to the director of US EPA, to the writing to the head of US EPA Region 5 in Chicago. You have a card and an address writing to Ohio EPA, but really the governor of Ohio is also a good place to write and just express your dissatisfaction. You know, we solve this problem if we stop over applying commercial fertilizer and manure. The problem goes away. If you look at 2019 was so wet in the spring that we couldn't get onto the fields to apply phosphorus, either commercial fertilizer or manure. That year, the amount applied went down by 62%. That's the only year we saw an improvement in water quality coming out of the Maumee River.
Because we put less down.
We put 62%
That was the
less
spring.
down.
It was so wet, fields around Wood County were not even planted that year. They
That's
just
exactly
didn't plant.
right. We saw a 30% improvement. We needed a 40%, so we were 75% of the way there simply by applying less. And we saw an immediate improvement. You saw somebody on the movie say, took us a long time to get here and it's going to take a long time to improve it. Baloney. You reduce the amount that's applied. In 1 year, you saw a huge improvement. We can change this just by not applying too much. That's all it takes.
But you're only going to be able to, if you get a really wet spring and they can't apply manure, well, that might be good for however many months they can keep filling those manure lagoons up. But when you've got 25 million animals pooping and peeing every day, and it has to go through this industrial process of getting put into manure lagoons and then applied in liquid form on the fields, that's a system that you can't just shut off. And when I was a kid, I grew up in Berkey, Ohio. I worked on farms. I went in there with a pitchfork and cleaned out the cow barn and the pig barn. And you saw this old-timey tractor and manure spreader in here, flipping around. That almost doesn't even belong in a documentary about Lake Erie because that is so seldom done anymore. They put them in these huge tankers that you saw, and it goes across the land, and it just dumps the stuff, and it goes right into the streams.
Joe Logan, thank you for being here tonight. Weigh in, please.
Yeah, I also think that there are some farm organizations, such as ours, and some environmental organizations that can be very productive in this. We've written an official letter to the Ohio Department of Agriculture saying that we want a census of livestock in the western basin of Lake Erie. And we
Thank
would
you.
Toward the idea of establishing a carrying capacity in terms of the number of livestock that can be permitted in any given watershed. We think that those are sort of practical steps that can move us in the right direction. So join with your environmental organizations, with right-minded farm organizations, and express yourself.
It seems to me, living up here in Northwest Ohio, but anybody along the Lake Erie shore, Republican, Democrat, whatever they are, in Columbus would stand together, but we're still just Northern Ohio. Do we fight that other farmers around the states give a rat's patootie about what's going on up there? We're fine down here in fill in the blank.
My understanding is that most farmers are envious of farmers up here in northwestern Ohio because the billions of dollars that have flowed in from H2 Ohio have landed here instead of elsewhere. But most everybody is aware of the phosphorus issue and realize that it is a global issue rather than a Northwest Ohio
That's
issue.
another thing I remember seeing the first time I saw this documentary. Around the globe, you saw those same satellite images that look for all the world like what we deal with every summer out here. This is a global deal, Jeff Reuter.
Absolutely. Every state in the country, in 2015 was the worst bloom we've ever seen on Lake Erie. That same year, there was a bloom on the Ohio River that was 650 miles long. So this is the whole state, the whole country, the whole world.
I almost hate to say this because a very normal response is, please don't tell us how to eat. But I got to tell you, one of the reasons we have this big of a problem is because of the amount of meat that is consumed. And this is something that is not, Lake Erie is not going to get cleaned up by individual Joes and Susans eating less meat, because this is a whole model of agriculture that's got to be overhauled. But that is something that we can do to lessen the burden to the whatever extent an individual consumer can.
So tonight, if you leave here and say, and find yourself feeling that I've got to do something, or maybe feeling helpless, is there anything I can do? I want to reiterate what Dr. Reuter said. Consider sending the administrator of the U.S. EPA an email or a note of concern. Express your concerns to the address that you can find in your program. Or you can reach out via a postcard, which we have on the table. If you didn't get one coming in, we'll have them for you going out, a table at the back of the theater. Our hope here, obviously, is that by educating, informing, and maybe lighting some fires, that a collective effort will someday prevent future growth of toxic algal blooms in the Maumee River and Lake Erie. Could I have just these guys gave up a Saturday night. From Wade Cabbage, Jeff Reuter, Joe Logan, Mike Ferner, our panelists tonight, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much. Thanks to all of you for being here. Let's take action, and thanks for coming out tonight. Pleasure being with you. Oh, and may I say, my wife, Terry, is right there in the second row. Put up with me. We'll have 43 years marriage come November. So, thanks, guys.